Hello, how's it going, folks? It's nice to see ya. My name is Dustin Cormier. Today we are on another episode of How to Rock Astrology. Today's episode we're going to be discussing the Pitri Nakshatra. This is Magha Nakshatra. It's a pleasure to see you all. I'm just looking for I'm looking to get our comments happening on the channel so that I can see all of your beautiful comments. And yeah, it's a pleasure to see y'all. So, this is part of our Nakshatra, our 27 Nakshatra series. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the native, the Magha native, kind of closer to the end of the video. At the beginning, we're going to be discussing where the sources of our information comes from. And if you want to get a better understanding and idea of where this information comes from, you can check out the beginning video in this series. The first video in this video series discusses all of the guts of why we refer to the Taittiriya Brahmana as being the primary source of information on the nakshatras. Hello, Irene. Nice to see you, my friend. And to everybody else hanging out with us. So yeah, check out the first video in this series to get a glimpse of why we get our information from the Taittiriya Brahmana. But I'm still going to talk a little bit about it in this video. So that'll kind of be our intro, and then we're going to get into the script. Now, somebody has asked, East Karmic Life has asked, am I rocking sidereal? The answer is no. I am a tropical Vedic astrologer. I use tropical rashis or signs, but I use sidereal lunar nakshatra measurements. And how exactly to measure the sidereal nakshatras is still a difficult debated issue in our world, in the tropical world, although it's still also somewhat debated in the sidereal as well. I guess not really. In the sidereal, Ashwini is always at 0 degrees Aries, and that's always kind of fixed. In the tropical world, it's conveyed in different ways. But yes, I'm a tropical Vedic astrologer, just so we can clarify that. Now, I'm going to do a little introduction here, and it's going to kind of describe the nature of the astrology that I follow and the nature of what's to be expected in this video. Essentially, as I said, this is our 27 Nakshatras series, and in my practice I use 12 tropical rashis or signs overlaid on the 27 sidereal nakshatras. In the tropical idea, there are two different things. And you can see more in my sidereal and tropical debate videos for more information on the difference between tropical and sidereal. Tropical is the typical Western measurement. In tropical astrology, or, almost like Western astrology, we don't turn the signs back 23 degrees like the sidereal people do. Now, a metaphor for this is the one I always give. There's an old classic story. The ego, a demon of ego, started to think that it was bigger than everything in the universe and started taking over the universe, the ego, the individual sense of self. And Vishnu, being the truth and alignment of what the self truly is, came to the ego as a midget, an atom. And this tiny little midget says to the ego, hey, I'm not asking for much here. I'm just looking for 3 steps. I'm looking to take 3 footsteps of land. And I just want these 3 footsteps of land. And the ego says, you're so small. You can take your 3 steps of land. And Vishnu says, great. With his first step, he grows the size of the cosmos And his first step is deep space. That's the sidereal nakshatras that are fixed in the sky. Then he takes, with his second step, he takes local space, and that's the tropical signs, the zodiac, the 12 signs. So his first step is the 27 nakshatras. The second step is the 12 signs of the zodiac. And the third step is the earth spinning on its own axis and the houses, etc. Essentially, with his third step, he allows Vishnu to step on his own head. East Karmic Life has said that, I believe, or East Karmic Life is saying that they have a YouTube channel called Mastering the Zodiac. If anybody would like to check it out, I haven't checked it out myself, but this person is saying that it's a YouTube channel that's sidereal that talks about the zodiac. I'd love to chat with you about it, East Karmic Life, and thank you for being on the channel and checking us out here. Mastering the Zodiac. Awesome. Okay, so how we roll with the tropical world in this series. My intention is to convey the essence or nature of the nakshatras as they are without the sign associations, without assuming that the nakshatras and signs are combined together. Now, in our camp, my camp is Ernst, Wilhelm, and Vic Dicara, and RYAN KURCZAK'S and these folks. The present word is that the most authentic and undistorted literature we have available on the nakshatras comes from the Taittiriya Brahmana. It's a commentary on the Krishna Yajurveda, kind of considered to be a continuation of it. Oh no, I didn't bring water. Shucks. I'm going to have to go and get some water at some point for myself. We'll wait till we get a little bit further in. The Krishna Yajurveda is Vedic era literature, probably produced about 3,000, if not more, years ago, around 2000 BC, let's say. 2000, so that'd be 4,000 years old. So around 2000 BC is when a lot of, 2000 to 3000 BC is when a lot of the Vedic literature was conveyed and conceived through the rishis, and it wasn't written down until 2000 to 1000 BC. So the Taittiriya Brahmana comes from that era, which is long before the traditional, that's long before horoscope astrology. So this is what the nature of this distortion that we're discussing here. The nakshatras have, a lot of the times when you read a book on the nakshatras, it's possible that there's two types of possible distortion, which Vic Dicara in particular has tried to comb out with his interpretations by leaning on the Taittiriya Brahmana. Number one is the zodiac sign associations. It's the sidereal tropical debate has caused much distortion to the nature of the nakshatras, because again, people assume that Ashwini is inherently related to Aries, or that Jesta is inherently related to Scorpio, when in the tropical world, Jesta is now in Sagittarius. So a lot of the jealousy associated with the moon in Jesta is not necessarily as heavy as it was once thought, etc. So there's the zodiac associations, which we ignore in this series. We also ignore the Vimshotri Lord. That's the planet that rules the first dasha period when the moon falls in that nakshatra. For example, in the case of Magha, let's see, Magha's thing. Oh, I don't have it in here, but that's okay. Most people think that when the moon falls into Magha, that a certain planet is going to, it's going to be the first Vimshotri dasha. And so therefore, I'll use an example of one that I have memorized is Jesta. Jesta is my own moon sign. Since my moon is in Jesta, when I was born, the first dasha that I experienced was Mercury. So people say that Jesta nakshatra has the essence of Mercury in it. In this series, we're aiming to convey that the information given in the Taittiriya Brahmana was given long before the idea of Vimshotari, long before the idea of the natal horoscope. So it's less of, it's more of a pure essence of the nakshatra that we read from the Taittiriya Brahmana. That's the idea of it, and you can read more of that in the introductory video in this series. Now, these are some of the coordinates of the signs in the current tropical astrology map of where the nakshatras land. Now, it's interesting because Vic Dicara is very classic. He kind of goes almost by the Lahiriya Namsha of sidereal signs, coupled with the tropical chart, and he always has that in a fixed pattern. It's always, the signs are always 13 degrees and 20 minutes. That's what each nakshatra length is with Vic Dicara. With Ernst, it's a little bit different, at least with Dhruva as the equatorial longitude, which is something that I'm still working through, folks. One day I'm gonna do a chat with Ernst and Vic and discuss why these are so different. But you'll notice, for example, for Vic, Kritika starts at about 20 degrees Taurus. For Ernst, in this Ayanamsha, Kritika is at also about 20 degrees. So there's hardly any difference between the two. But midway through, for example, Magha is at 24 degrees of Leo, and for Ernst, Magha is at about 16 degrees of Leo. That's an 8-degree difference. It's a huge difference. So it's hard to say what's correct here for me. I'm still moving through it. But for those watching, under Vic's authority, Magha is between 24 degrees Leo and 7 degrees Virgo. And for Ernst, Magha is between 16 degrees Leo and 0 degrees Virgo. So you're probably Magha if you're between 24 degrees Leo and 0 degrees Virgo. If you've got the moon or any planet at the end of Leo, then it's probably Magha, because it's contained by both of these systems. Outside of that, it's you got to use, that's what we're doing in this day and age. Got to use the best of your intuition, learn about Magha through videos like mine, get to the essence of what Magha is all about, feel into its character, and see if that's your moon sign or what have you, or if that's the moon sign of the person in question. And as Vic has often said, if you're unsure, if something is cuspy, if a planet's on the cusp of a nakshatra, a lot of the times, and if you can't be sure that if you're doing a client's chart, you can't be sure that the moon or whatever planet is in that nakshatra, just focus on other things. Focus on things that you can be sure about, because you've got this person's life in your hands. So it's better for you to just be honest with yourself that you aren't entirely sure than to lead them through an astrology reading that isn't quite surely them. Because again, as astrologers, we have people's lives in our hands. So it's better to be safe and not make a call if you're not sure about it. So if the moon is between 24 degrees of Leo, about 24 degrees of Leo, and about 0 degrees of Virgo, you might have a bit more sureness that the moon or whatever planet is in Magha. Other than that, you've got to feel it out. So before we get into the interpretation of the Taittiriya Brahmana, we're going to discuss 4 classical nakshatra characteristics. And these qualities are not given in the Taittiriya Brahmana. They've been culled by the intuition of authors and commentators, and they might be entangled in the distortion points we've mentioned, but it's still, I think it's useful to discuss them here just so people can see how expansive the nakshatras can be. There's the activity, there's the 7 qualities of the nakshatras, there's the sexual yoni animal, which is very important in lunar compatibility in traditional Indian marriage assessment. And then there's the kingdom. It's Jiva, Mula, and Dhatu. All of these are different things, and they're all grouped in different ways. The activity is kind of its own thing, but I know the kingdom is grouped in, it just goes one after the other. In the same way that in astrology, the cardinal signs, there's the cardinal fixed mutable, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, cardinal fixed mutable. In that same schema, Ernst Wilhelm has told us in his new Rashi Sutras that cardinal signs relate to Dhatu. It's the minerals. So Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, they actually get into physical things. They actually get into, like, if they're a mechanic, like, they'll get into getting many different cars. They'll find out where all the local cars are, their used vehicles, and they'll tell people to bring them their used vehicles, and they'll get all the scrap parts, and they'll really be focused on building a material business on the ground somewhere. That's Dhatu, that's the mineral types. Now the fixed signs, Taurus, Leo, Aquarius, and Scorpio. The fixed signs are Mula, which are plants. They're in between the mineral and the human. So the Mula types can get into material things, but they're also very interested in how they can use humans to help further their material businesses. So the fixed types will have material businesses, but they'll be in flux. They'll be moving with the motions of the people around them, the commerce around them, the society around them, and they might not be as focused on putting all their eggs into one material business venture or what have you. They're interested in using people to get pulled into different directions. So the Mula is in the middle. And then there's Jiva. Jiva is strictly all about people. They're passionate, they're entertainers, they're politicians, they're manipulative in ways, sometimes positive, sometimes negative, depending on what planet is going on in the Jiva sign. And that's the mutable signs, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. When somebody has most of their planets in mutable signs, they're going to have the quality of Jiva. And it's the same thing with the moon sign in a Jiva nakshatra. So if the moon sign is in a Dhatu nakshatra, it has that mineral quality, the earthy quality. If it's in a Mula nakshatra, it has the plant quality. If it's in a Jiva nakshatra, it has the animal quality. And what we see with Magha is that Magha is considered a mineral Dhatu nakshatra. So Magha, like the mutable signs, is going to be interested in physical things, in the physical world. And, once we get into Magha, you learn that they are organizers of power and ordinance. They can be politicians, but usually they are conservative conveyors of some kind of value, some kind of principle in society, some kind of law, some kind of philosophy that they are the gatekeepers for, in a way. So they are, as Dhatu people, they will set up, Magha will set up institutions. They'll set up places of business that are vibing to the tune of whatever belief system that they're trying to help conserve. They might also be instigators of like police forces and, like these kinds of things that keep society in order through the power invested in them, as we're going to learn about Magha. In particular, they are, arbiters of, they're arbiters of law and ordinance and powers invested above them, and they do it through Dhatu. They do it through minerals. They do it through creating institutions and places and businesses that keep that stuff together. Ernst Wilhelm has described the animal kingdom of the nakshatras as being very important. That's why I give it a lot of emphasis. Magha, the deva of Magha is the Pitris, our ancestors. The meaning is mighty. Oh, there's the ancient ruler, K2. Like I said, that ancient ruler is a point of distortion, possibly, that comes from the fact that if the moon is in Magha when you're born, Ketu is your first dasha ruler. But, some people say that Ketu is very much in the nature of Magha. I understand why people would think that, but in this series, we tend to ignore that dimension in order to get at the pure essence of Magha that comes from the nakshatra, that comes from the Nakshatra Sutras. In any case, the activity is considered active. The quality is considered, these are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are the 5 ugra, fierce and severe nakshatras. So anybody with the moon or ascendant in any of these nakshatras, they're ugra. They can be a little bit severe and intense. And again, Magha has that rule by might makes right kind of quality to it. And its yoni animal is the male rat. So Magha actually really can do well with Purva Falguni, because the Purva Falguni is the female rat. And there are other compatibilities of the nakshatras. The nakshatra compatibility is huge. I'm going to be doing videos on that eventually. But yes, Magha is one of the 5 ugra, fierce, severe nakshatras. Right? And it does play into the character of Maghas again, the might makes right consciousness, the fighting for conserving values and social philosophies and things of importance to the person. That being said, we all have to keep in mind again that everything we've heard so far is given to possible distortion as the distortion points that we've talked about. Still useful to read about. In today's time, it's the reason why I'm giving them out. I'm not talking about them for no reason. We have to learn what's in the Taittiriya Brahmana, see the essence of the nakshatra, and then try and see if these 4 classical qualities relate to the baser essence. It's kind of what we're doing in this series, So, before I get into the sutra structure of the Taittiriya Brahmana, I'm going to take one quick moment and I'm going to go get myself some water, folks. So for those of you watching, this is Magha Nakshatra. I'm going to get a little bit of water and then I'm going to be right back. Hello. Sorry for the wait, folks. Okay, we're live at 5 here, ladies and germs. Now, let's get into the Taittiriya Brahmana. Thank you, Reshma. My friend Nareshma has said thank you and keep up the great work. I'm glad to hear that. Excuse me. All right, let's get into it. So this is the sutra structure that is given in the Taittiriya Brahmana. A sutra is conveyed as like a thread. Alan Watts talks about this idea where, if you've got an emblem or those patches that you can put on your clothes, on the front of it, it looks very pretty. It's just clean. All you see is the patch on the front. When you look underneath it, there's a whole bunch of interweavings and intersections and threads that are holding what's on the face, on the surface. A sutra is kind of like this. What we see on the surface is a certain bit of information, but there's a weaving, there's an information web that this is only the face for. It's like an iceberg. You only see the tip of it, but underneath the iceberg is loaded with meaning. And part of the way that they load the Nakshatra Sutras with meaning in the Taittiriya Brahmana. This is a time when the rishis, they didn't have pen and paper. So when they were also already holding the Vedas, a lot of these guys just wanted to hold on to the Vedas and talk about that and constantly just refer to that over and over. But the people who were creating the Krishna Yajurveda, for example, wanted to produce this information about the nakshatras. So when they did, they didn't want to mince words. They didn't want to talk about it too much. They didn't want to overcomplicate it. So what they did is they condensed it into this 6-piece phrase that each of the 6 pieces in these Nakshatra Sutras all fits in the same way. Piece A, piece B, piece C, piece D, piece D, and piece F is always going to be a pattern for this nakshatra, and then the next nakshatra, and then the next nakshatra. And they squish a lot of information into each sutra that is supposed to give you the essence of the nakshatra, so that they can memorize it, so that they could have the essence, a pearl of what the nakshatra means, because they couldn't write it down. So they wanted to make their memorization patterns as concise as possible. Light is asking if I'll make a video about Shatabhishak Nakshatra, and of course I will, Light. It'll be a while. It's been already a long coming just to get to the point that we're at. But I'm taking my time with it. These videos take a lot of time. Not that I'm complaining. I love to do it. But it'll be a while before we get to Shatabhishak. So, this is our sutra structure. At the top, we have the true nakshatra name. Of course, in this case, it's Magha in the gray. The pink word is going to be the deity that rules the nakshatra in classical Vedic literature. Who is the deity? And usually the deity, there's the deity, and then there's like the deity, what the deity is doing, and that's usually the name of the nakshatra. A lot of the times, the name of the nakshatra is almost like an action or a noun, or describing what is happening through the deity. That's what the nakshatra name means. Now, sometimes obscure names are given in order to convey more information about the nakshatra. The yellow word is the foundation from above. So this is what's needed for the nakshatra to function properly. The first gray word, the parastad, is an expression of the previous. So, for example, whatever is the phrase for Magha, it's rudantaha. Parastat means para is like above. So this is what, it's like the nakshatras are raining energy from down from above, from the divine, from the crown of our head, the crown chakra. Energy is flowing through us downward. So if this nakshatra is appropriated properly with what its needs are, then it will produce good things in the foundation below. And the foundation below is essentially what the nakshatra desires to produce from what it receives. That's the blue word. So the deity, through this nakshatra, requires the yellow word in order to produce the blue word. And this is the same formula for every nakshatra. So we're going to use the same understanding of this formula when we get into the Magha Nakshatra. And this is it here. Now, a lot of this stuff I've gotten from Vic Dicara's website, including the starry background thing. But this is coming from the Taittiriya Brahmana. This is the Taittiriya Brahmana Sutras of the nakshatras. So when we go through it, you have to always remember that this is where this is coming from. Even though we're going to read different people's translations of it, this is the original Pitrinam nakshatra in the Taittiriya Brahmana. You can listen to, I'm going to do my best to do the Sanskrit here. I'm getting better at it, and I enjoy doing it. If anybody's interested, when you go on Vic Dicara's YouTube channel and you go to his latest series of Nakshatra Sutras, he does the sutra in probably a more clean way than I'm going to do it. If you wanted to hear it, because a lot of people say if you get the Nakshatra Sutra, you listen to it, the information will come to you from within. And it's important to be able to do that if you're really into these nakshatras. For those who just want the information, here we are on YouTube discussing what I think it means. And that's always an important thing to remember. This is just one person's interpretation of it. So, this is our Nakshatra Sutra for Magha. Pitrinam Magha Rudantaha Parastad Apapramso Avastat Pitrinam Magha Rudantaha Parastad Apapramso Avastat. You'll notice when there's a dot underneath the R, it has a ri. When there's a dot under the H, it has a h. Usually any stuff involved with an S is going to be variations on the S or the sh. Between those two, there's even a halfway point. There's shush, which is a very hard sh. And then there's snake, which is the regular S. And then there's the s. It's like between the two. Apabramso. Pitrinam Magha Rudantaha Parastat Apapramso Vastat. So this is our sutra. Now let's get into what exactly these words mean and how we can understand what they mean. Now I always like to start with Ernst Wilhelm's depiction of the sutras. As you can all see here, this is something that anybody can find online. Ernst gives it out for free. It's a PDF. When you read the PDF, essentially I've cut it out and put it into this little book that I've just made myself. And this is where I get this information. Ernst Wilhelm has not, in my opinion, Ernst Wilhelm is my guy. But with the nakshatras, I think Vic Dicara has done more meticulous work. No one will ever know which is the more accurate of the two. But in the case of these Nakshatra Sutras, Ernst has leaned into a more literal translation. It's like Ernst has a brassy translation where it almost seems like all the words don't flow in a logistical English sense. Vic Dicara has still kept it very literal, but has really worked meticulously to make the phrasing of the sutra capable of being understood clearly in English. So Ernst is more brassy, Vic is more flowing. So it's nice to be able to read both. I always read Ernst's first because we can really scratch into the essence of what these words mean. And then with Vic, we can start to put them together to make logical sense. So this is Ernst Wilhelm's translation of this sutra. Pitrinam is plural. It's of the ancestors. So Magha is something coming from the Pitrinam. And Pitrinam is our ancestors. As we can see in the top right corner here, we have a little picture of this person doing a puja. It's a specific type of puja. Gosh, I just did it the other month. I won't be able to think of it. It's especially done around the time of Halloween, and I did a little ceremony with myself to my ancestors, and I loved being able to do it. It's a beautiful connection to the ancestors, which, I'm going to say at this point, and maybe I'll probably say it at other points. I'm somebody who's interested in psychedelics, and I've learned that there is a psychedelic substance known as iboga, tabernanfe iboga. I got my hands on Tabernamphei Iboga's cousin, which is Tabernamphei Menii. You can get it online. It's a little dropper that you put under your tongue, and this brings out some of that quality that's described to ibogaine, which is said to bring you into connection with your ancestors. Since I've been having experiences with this stuff, it's very hard for me to convey what exactly I think that means. Part of it feels like it's my past lives. Part of it feels like, in the classic Vedic literature is the patrilineal lineage. It's my father, my father's father, my father's father's father, my grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, all the way up. There's a train of patrilineal ancestral lineage correlated with at least the Pitrinam of Magha. Magha in particular, the nakshatra, relates to this masculine sense of curbing the craziness. So maybe ibogaine has masculine and feminine lineage of ancestry, and maybe that's what I was kind of, when I did this puja, I was aligning with the feminine and the masculine ancestry. But again, I reiterate, with Magha, it's all about the fatherly lineage. So this is what we are talking about when we talk about the ancestors in particular in this phrase. Pitrinam Magha. So Pitrinam is the ancestors, and Magha is described by Ernst as being gifts or rewards. Rudantaha relates to Rudra in a way, and it describes crying or weeping, according to Ernst. So the gifts of the ancestors are expressed as a crying or weeping from above, and this produces apabhramsha, which is a falling down, a failure, or a corruption, and that is from below. So the gifts of the Pitri are crying from above and are the fallen down from below. Now, this is again why I often think that, Ernst has been very brass and literal here. Vic Dicara does take this in a different direction. And I think that the way Vic Dicara describes it just seems to me, again, he's done more work on it. But we can almost see what's happening here, where the gifts of the ancestors are a weeping from above, some kind of grief, some kind of necessary energy from above that can lead to a sort of, apabhramsha is described as a falling down or failure or a corruption. This almost can give this picture of when we don't align with what's important to us, to our philosophy, then there will be corruption. This nakshatra, the way it's described here, is a bit vague, especially because it doesn't quite align with Vic's thing. I'd almost like to move on from it, but I wanted to convey it here just so people can see what Ernst's description of it is here. Now, Vic Dicara gives us a little bit of a different take on how we can define what is being said here. The Pitrinam are the forefathers. And by the way, this comes from Vic Dicara's Nakshatras course on his website, and I do highly recommend it. Pitrinam is like our forefathers. Magha, Ernst described it as a gift or reward. Vic describes it as a conferred power. It's like the gift or an energy coming from the forefathers, coming from the ancestors. And an energy as such is going to contain the energy of those forefathers, of the Pitrinam. So it's going to be power, essentially, is what's described. This is part of the reason why Magha is often seen in the context of the symbol of a throne. A throne of power is being conferred from the forefathers. Now, there is conferred power coming from the forefathers. How it's conveyed is rudantaha, which is demoralizing and striking fear. Right? This brings us back to the ugra nature of this nakshatra. It's a little bit intense. It's the might makes right. Now, this is, in all the nakshatras, it can be defined as unhealthy or healthy. And there is a healthy reason and outlet for this nakshatra. The power of an authority often needs to demoralize or strike fear of that which is not good. Ideally, a good king, a good ruler, will tell everybody, don't go off and do these bad things, or else bad things will happen. And a papramsho, again, as it's translated in its very brass way still, is to confound and ruin. Ideally, we are demoralizing those bad things to confound and ruin the bad things and protect the good things. So what's good about Magha is that there's leadership and power. It deters competitors and rivals by the air of confidence and authority invested in it. Somebody with Magha has the capacity to demoralize or, because it's got authority coming from behind it. Magha is usually going to align itself with some kind of higher power, especially the moon in Magha, but also the ascendant in Magha. They're going to align themselves with what they think is the right and just authority. And they're going to act as a police dog for the authority, in a way. Negatively, they can be sensitive to maintaining an imposing and impressive image. They are in need of being authorized by greater powers. And if they are not authorized by greater powers, they might have a false image of just going around striking fear into the hearts of those who would do bad, but their idea of bad might be skewed. The path to evil is always paved with good intentions, as they say. So Magha needs to be aware of not becoming too power hungry for the sake of power hungry. The fourth, now this is these are two different overall translations. The second one comes from the authentic heart of Vedic astrology that we're about to read. I have the book. Let's see, where did I put it? Here it is. So this second line is going to come from Nakshatra, the authentic heart of Vedic astrology, and we're going to read it again in a moment. This first line comes from Vic's Nakshatra Sutras, and it's a little bit different. It's the forefathers' gift of power, Magha. Magha here is described as a gift, and the gift is power, energy, coming from behind. So the forefathers' gift of power needs demoralization in order to ruin, which again can be better described as suppressed deviance from the ancestral line of thought. Magha people could be very interested. They could be people who are interested in ancestry and learning what their forefathers were all about. So when they look and see what all of their forefathers have been trying to convey through their ancestral code, Magha will see that and think, there's a power coming forth from me. It's like the underdog. Imagine an underdog person who has, they just believe in themselves. They believe in their mission coming from their ancestors, from their father. And my grandfather taught me to do this, and his great-grandfather taught me to do this. And you're a part of this great lineage of men who wanted to do this thing. It could be anything. It could be bricklaying, But the code of the bricklayer, if there is one, this is something that a Magha person will want to do, see, and learn, so that when they go to hang out with other bricklayers, they have an authority. They have an understanding of the importance of their craft and a pride in their craft in this way. So this is part of the power that Magha people attract to themselves. It doesn't necessarily need to be, hanging by the udders of the government or the king or the police force. It doesn't necessarily have to be that. It can be a very maverick thing that is just connected to their own personal patrilineal lineage. And Magha will look for these kinds of ins to feel like they have the power invested in them to make powerful changes in the world. Now, I have oh my gosh, thank you. The Wandering Sage has just given me a donation and a tip, and we have a comment with it. Well, Magha, I seem to attract these types of women. We always clash. You've got the moon in Purva Ashada and 2 planets in Uttara Ashada with Ardra and the Lagna. You don't do well with authoritarian types. Interesting. Thank you for sharing, Wandering Sage. Magha can definitely have an authoritative energy to it. And truth be told, whether it's a man or a woman, there are people who, the nakshatras are like the astrology signs. There's none of them are good or bad. Scorpio is not good or bad. It depends on who you ask. If you ask a Pisces and a Cancer, they love Scorpio because they're all water signs. Same thing with the nakshatras. Certain nakshatras will like the authoritative nature of Magha, and certain ones will be overly, sensitive to it and not in flow with it. So everything's subjective, especially in the world of astrology, right? So from Nakshatra, the authentic heart of Vedic astrology, we read that the power invested in forefathers relies upon deploring to suppress deviance. That deploring means essentially negatively saying that, those things are bad. I deplore, that this thing is not a good thing. It's pruning the hedges of society's interests. An example that's coming to my head is that there's probably a lot of people with Magha Nakshatra who would be, they can be conservative. Not always, but this can go many different ways. You could have a Magha person who is in a long line of, families who consider, like entertainment and night lifestyle and the art of the body and dance to be a positive, constructive, and encouraging thing. So you could have a woman or a man who has Magha moon or ascendant who speaks positively to the positive value of nightlife and of enjoying the body and enjoying the flesh in probably still a conservative way, but in a balanced way. You could also have somebody who is of the Magha Nakshatra, probably more likely the case, of somebody who would say, all these girls who are putting their butts out on Instagram and all these people who are putting their flesh out there, it's all too much, OnlyFans, all this stuff is ruining society, and we've got to curb that in because the human preciousness of emotional energy is deteriorating because of this. A Magha person could go both ways. They could encourage it as a positive value, in which case, if a person is encouraging the nightlife consciousness, they're going to say, don't be so stuffy. They're deploring stuffiness. A Magha, encourages something by deploring that which it's not. That's kind of the idea here. And it's usually conservative. So the person who would be deploring, a person who has Magha could be advocating for a conservative attitude towards the body by deploring sluttiness, by negating it, However they decide to bring something up and encourage it, they do so by protecting it, by conserving it, by deploring that which is not it. Now I just want to do a quick peek here. Vic Dicara has a great section in his Nakshatra book where he describes what's called it's in here somewhere. The True Story of the Nakshatra Gods. I've gone through the whole thing in my on my channel. And essentially what we read about the Pitrinam is that they are the arbiters of Yama, the god of death. So they are also described as Yamaduta, which is the kind of the watchdogs, the police dogs, the on the front people who are working in tandem with Yama. Yama is the god of Bharani. So I'd be interested to see if there's any connections between Bharani Nakshatra and Magha Nakshatra, because Magha is acting as the arbiter of the dead in a way. And this is why the dead have no livingness in them. So the idea is that they're almost pure rational reason in a way. They have less of the intense engagement of the stimulation of the senses and of sexuality and all these things. So the dead just want what's best for us. So they will give us these decrees. And the Magha person is trying to get the sense of what would be the greatest and intelligent thing for humans to abide by as social political philosophies, and trying to rein us in from the deviations that come from the senses and from excitement and stimulation. So this entire class of supernatural beings called the Pitri provide the bulk of help for moral law and order. Now the Pitris are deities who have tasked themselves with ushering the deceased and disembodied minds of the dead out from their body and their previous life into the court of Yama through his corrective or augmentative preparatory regimens. It's kind of like Yama is the judgment that we read in Christianity. It's the place where it's energy. The energy that we've expressed in our lives is going to continue forth, because this life is connected from the heart to all the other incarnations that we are intimately connected to. And eventually, after going through this limbo of experiencing, in the Egyptian myth, whether your heart is lighter than a feather. If your heart is lighter than a feather, you get to go into nirvana. And if it's not, you get moved back into the womb of Bharani. That's why Bharani, you would have noticed, is one of the Ugra Nakshatras. It looks like a pussy, like it looks like a yoni. That's the symbol of Bharani. It's because it's a womb. It's a birthing place for the soul having come through from its previous incarnation. The Pitri's realm is a netherworld, subterranean, but it's still above the Naga. We just talked about Ashlesha. Ashlesha is the Nagal world of the deeper inner subconscious. Yama establishes his court above the Naga, but still subterranean, still below. So Yama establishes his court here in Magha, the seat of authority and power. So this is why Magha can be this judge in a way. It acts as the throne of power for Yama. And it's the Pitris who deal with what that authority is and what it means. Pitris are the ones who carry judgment in a certain way. Sometimes this can be for positive reasons. Sometimes judgment is a 4-letter word on planet Earth. Sometimes it's carrying out a judgment is a necessary and good thing. Sometimes the nature of a Magha person can be judgment for the sake of judgment with no moral compass, can be a little bit cold. So this is what Magha people have to understand and consider. Now, the Pitri wield the power of Yama, but they prefer to do so in benevolent ways, helping beings get through the confusing interim between tangible incarnations. They have a tendency to appear as deceased relatives, and this is part of what earns them the name ancestors, or Pitri. Very interesting. So that's a little bit of background on the deity of the Pitris. I'm gonna be making a video describing the Pitris as deities, coming from the divine forces of the Lunar Nakshatras. That will be coming along as well, and that'll give us a little bit more detail into the nature of the deity of this nakshatra. Hello, Genius POV. It's nice to see you. Thanks for hanging out with us here. So, now we've gotten a little bit of the character of the deity and the background of what Magha and the Pitris are. Let's start digging into the next section. We're going to be reading from Nakshatra, the authentic heart of Vedic astrology. This is where Vic Dicara, my boy Vic Dicara back here, he's going to be taking us through in more detail the Nakshatra Sutra, and in the end he's going to give us a nice little interpretive, a way of interpreting planets in the sign of Magha, and that's including all the planets, not just the ascendant and the moon. So, what we read from Magha: the power invested in forefathers relies on deploring rudantaha to suppress deviance, apabramshaha. So first, the word Pitri. The word itself means father, but Pitrinam, as it's described in the sutra, describes it's plural, so that would be fathers. In this context, the word refers to a class of divinities considered to be patrilineal ancestors, meaning, again, my father's 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 father, etc. Fathers are classically the imposing figure whose ability to punish causes the family to follow rules. This is why Magha is associated with forefathers and not, that's Pitri, forefathers, and not foremothers, which is Matri. Matri, of course, probably has a lot to do with the heart, the emotional desires, with love. So the Matri are still important. They're just not considered to be part of the consciousness of Magha and the conservative pruning energy that is defined by the patrilineal energy of the Pitris. Magha, that's part of where Magha gets this hard, ugra, fierce and severe, conservative kind of pruning energy, this narrowing energy. Now, the word Magha itself, this word describes power, specifically the type of power that is conferred and gifted to someone. For example, police are conferred power by the government, and a sheriff in turn may confer power to a deputy. A babysitter or older sibling can be conferred power by the parents. That's Magha. Now the Pitri are ushers of the underworld, and that's the Pitri, who are invested and deputed with power by the lord of the underworld, Yama. So hence they are alternatively known as Yamaduta, which means ambassadors of Yama. So the Pitri are not particularly powerful on their own, but the power invested in them by Yama allows them to carry out their work unchallenged, leading people into and through the process of death, even against the most powerful gods. There's plenty of times, I believe, where Indra has had to have run-ins with the Pitris for the craziness that he conveys in the Vedas. So, of course, we can see how this relates to Magha. Magha is only really in a state of the power that is at their essence when the power is coming through them, when they are a channel or a conduit for a higher authority than themselves. Now, the parastat word is rudanta. Rudantaha. Now, the root of this word is R-U-D. It's rud, like Rudra. The root of the word rudanta, again, I'm going to show quickly the phrase, right? Rudantaha. So the word rudantaha, the root of this word, R-U-D, means to deplore and lament. This means to criticize something and be unhappy with its ability to exist. It's just essentially to express the unhappiness with how this thing is, what this thing is, and to deplore it, you know, to kind of run it down into the ground through phrasing, through speaking of it in society, in art, however you're going to do it, or through brute force, as it often happens with Magha. Rud, relating to Rudra, kind of has this crying energy to it, this weeping, heavy energy to it, saying this is this terrible thing that we cannot do. So the power of the forefathers requires rudantaha, which is this weeping deploration and lamentation, and that's what brings up a Brahmsha. And now the root of this word is Brahm, and this means to move, to waver, to wander and stray, to become confused and lost, and this leads to errors, wrong turns, and similar errant and deviant ills. So that's Brahm. It means to wander and stray and to become lost. Now, when we add, I'll show this one more time, when we add the prefix apa, apa indicates downward motion. So apabhramsha may be taken to mean, essentially, it's indicative of a pushing or a holding down. So we may take the word apabhramsha to mean suppression and a curbing of deviance from the proper and correct path. Apa meaning downward, and then Brahm meaning, it's straying. So the apapramsa is pushing down or holding down from straying, from deviance from the proper and correct path. That's why this word is often conveyed, just as Ernst did. He conveyed it as a sort of falling into ruin. But really what's happening down here is that it's a holding so that the Brahm, the wandering, does not take place, right? That's kind of what Vic is giving us here. So in one last final sense, if we take rudanta to mean condemning and apabhramsha to mean suppression of deviance, then we can read the sutra as authority figures invested with daunting power suppress deviance by condemning it. That's really, again, that's a very condensed way of speaking to this sutra. Authority figures invested with daunting power suppress deviance from the proper path by condemning that deviance. It's a tricky thing, it's almost, when this is blown up, we can almost see it as being like cancel culture, which goes in and out of fashion. When it's used correctly, it is the proper apabhramsha. It's the proper holding from negative deviation. Like, I'm somebody who, I'm interested in, I always talk about being interested in psychedelic medicines and exploring consciousness through altered states. And that's something that's a passion of mine, but there's a piece of me that understands the Magha condemnation of like certain drugs. Certain hard drugs are not good for you at all. And I would be Magha about it. I'm a musician. I have many people in my life who I love very deeply, who are beautiful musicians, who have great talent, and they're pissing their life away from doing cocaine. Cocaine is a terrible thing happening in Ontario, Canada right now. The suppression of that, the holding, pushing deviation into that, how do I describe it? Encouraging in even a pushy way to not go towards cocaine is a good thing. That has to be expressed in society as a negative thing that's harming more people than doing good. This is why Magha, I respect it. I understand why this force exists as one of the nakshatras, because deviation from what is right can lead a lot of people down stupid roads, and some people just need the iron bar. They need the hard iron tough love in order to get through a compulsive deviation from what is right. And this is where Magha can come in handy and proper, right? It's just got to be done in the right way, and it's got to be done with the right planets, and it's got to be done with the right full chart and full consciousness, as Vic is going to tell us in this next section. We've read a good summary of what can be conveyed from this nakshatra. Now Vic Dicara is going to give us a little bit of interpretive understanding of how to interpret planets in Magha Nakshatra. So let's read what Vic says. Vic tells us that Magha is conservative and authoritative. So similar planets that convey the same energy, and he says this is Sun and Mars especially, but also Jupiter to some extent. When the Sun, Mars, and Jupiter fall into Magha Nakshatra, especially the Sun and Mars, they do very well here. This indicates a good understanding of the value and limits of conservatism. They're objective about it. They're not romantic and falling in love with the idea of going around suppressing people. They do it with that proper masculine, it's like if you've ever had a person with proper masculine energy. If you're hanging out with them, you're going hiking with them, everyone's laughing about and falling around and having a good time, and they can too. But when it comes to, guys, hold on, there's a ledge here, one of us could fall, let's just be very careful before we move forward with this. You guys go ahead, I'm going to kind of go back a bit, make sure you don't put your legs over that ledge, let's not be stupid here, let's be safe. We can all have fun, and that's all fun and games, but having that positive, that's like the Sun and Mars in Magha. It's a positive safety that doesn't necessarily ruin the fun, depending on how that works, depending on what's going on there. So Sun and Mars especially, but also Jupiter in Magha, can indicate a good understanding of the value and limits of conservatism. These give an empowering sense of adherence to a valid higher power and authority, which conveys a daunting and almost unchallengeable presence. You can't challenge a person who is completely in good locked stead with higher powers and authorities. Is like a cop. You can't fuck with a cop. I mean, maybe some people can, I don't know, that's not my bag, but I've never have and I never will, because I know they have the authority and power invested in them to crush me if they need to. be that how it may, I mean, when times get tough, the world gets squirrely. Sometimes Magha probably operates as an underdog who has to fight in a sovereign way against corporate elites and paid police officers who are an oppressive Magha force. So the people sometimes have to convey their own Magha force, and that's again coming from the patrilineal ancestry of freedom and like America's a good example of this. There's times when Americans, they all like to have their guns because my daddy did and his daddy did and his daddy did, just in case an oppressive government regime ever does take over. And in that case, Magha is in the common man as opposed to the dog for the big king. So we can see how these, have to be taken into context. In any case, the Sun and Mars especially, and sometimes Jupiter, in Magha suggest a sense of authority and a natural ability for leadership and governance. So people involved in ruling, managing, governing, and enforcing are very often favored by a positive Magha. As well, people in general who are involved in these things, ruling, managing, governing, and enforcing, you might find that they have Magha moon or Magha rising. Magha rising especially will express these things. Now, Magha can be given positive interpretations like this, as we talk about, using the power invested in them wisely and properly for proper reason. We see these interpretations when it is in a compatible chart, when it's in a compatible house, and when it's occupied by a compatible lord and planets. For example, the Sun and Mars, again to some extent Jupiter, are naturally compatible planets from Magha. It's going to depend on different things. If you have... Oh, excuse me, I needed that. If you're an Aquarius rising, if you've got Jupiter over at the end of Leo or at the beginning of Virgo, let's say at the beginning of Virgo especially, Jupiter's close to the 7th cusp where it's not that happy, and it's in Virgo where it's not that happy, at least in today's tropical times. So that Jupiter in Magha could think a little too deeply through Virgo about what's right and wrong, as opposed to just feeling the true patrilineal energy. And such a Jupiter being in the 7th house is listening too much to other people rather than itself. Jupiter prefers to be in the 1st house, where it's joy and truth coming from within. Jupiter is a little bit paying too much attention to the world outside of it when it's in the 7th house, and it gets kind of needlessly touting and preaching to everybody about how they ought to be. So of Jupiter and Magha at the beginning of Virgo, for example, in the 7th house, these are indicative of having a little bit less difficulty, even though it's Jupiter. So that's why we have to take all interpretations into context when we're reading about the nakshatras. Hello, Susie. Susie's popped in to say hello to us. Now, let's look at the planets that are less conducive to harmony in Magha. Since Magha wants to condemn and cause despair, it's Rudantaha, Magha is not ideal in matters requiring compassion, empathy, compromise, and sensitivity. In matters where judgment can ruin, or not narcissistic, but an overarching, high horse attitude of this is what the authorities say. If you are in a situation that requires more compassion than that, Magha can get into trouble. We can see, of course, this happening with the more romantic planets. We can see if you're in a relationship with someone and you're doing something that they don't appreciate, and it's something that you love. It's something that is an important part of you at some level, but you can compromise with it. If your partner comes along and says, you have to, because this is what the authorities say about this. I'm going to tell the cops on you if you keep smoking that pot, boyfriend. It's not exactly conducive to harmony. It's not conducive to a mutual, compassionate, compromising attitude. So we read that the sensitive and compassionate planets like the Moon, Venus, and to some extent Mercury can bring out this condemnation and despair where it's not wanted. And this can indicate problems with empathy, with stubbornness, with a fear of open and equal combat, and a dependency on unnecessarily heavy-handed authority. So the Moon, Venus, and sometimes Mercury in Magha can indicate stubbornness, a lack of empathy, a fear to trade off information in a confident way, in an open way. And there might be some times where, depending on, if this is the ascendant lord, if you're a Gemini rising, you've got your ascendant lord Mercury in Magha, and it's not well placed in other regards to the chart, you could see yourself having the ascendant lord in Magha as someone who wants to convey what's right and to do the authoritative rightness thing. But Mercury being a planet of open, playful ideas, you could be playful about upholding moral things that aren't that important and a little bit stubborn in that playfulness, or you can be not stubborn enough. You could come across as a person who's upholding social norms, but your Mercury is flaky on it and people will question your integrity. This is an example of, how it can go with Mercury not well placed. Or with any ascendant lord, as if it's the Venus, the Moon, or Mercury is in Magha, you might see yourself as being an important, loving person, but that how you convey that love can be a bit heavy-handed and not what the moon is supposed to do. If you're a Cancer rising and you've got the moon in Magha, you've got your mothering energy is going to come through with these hard, uncompromising, heavy-handed authority tones sometimes. It's the same thing with Venus. So Venus, the Moon, and Mercury have to be careful when they're in Magha for these reasons. Now, Rahu and Ketu and Saturn, when they are in Magha, being quite naturally anti-authoritarian, Rahu, Ketu, and Saturn can indicate pronounced clashes with conservative and hierarchical powers. This is like when Rahu and Ketu fall into Magha. Not always necessarily. If the lord of Rahu and Ketu is well placed, this could find a proper outlet. But it's likely there will be times in life when a person with Rahu, Ketu, in particular, Rahu and Ketu, are going to expand into this theme of being a power conduit for something larger than myself and get themselves involved in power conduits that are not great things. For example, if you just want to feel the power flowing through your fingers, you want to be a lap dog for some higher authority, someone with Rahu and Ketu could find themselves getting into like a mob gangster group, or you could find yourself in crime where you're being a lapdog for some higher boss who actually doesn't give a shit about you, who's only using you to convey his power, and who is doing morally questionable things with the power invested in you that you're applying. So this is Rahu and Ketu just being addicted to the sense of being a second banana to something that has power over everybody else. It's going to be corrupt cops can get Rahu and Ketu in Magha. They enjoy being the conveyors of an absolute power for an absolute authority, and that they feel that makes them an absolute power, an absolute authority, and they can go around doing things that they shouldn't be doing. But it can be conveyed positively as well. It's likely throughout the youth a person will muck around with stupid things like that, but a person with a Rahu and Ketu, with a well-placed Lord, Rahu and Ketu Lord, could become, again, that underdog who uses the authority invested in them from their daddy and their daddy's daddy and their daddy's daddy's daddy to align with some possible countercultural thing that is actually a positive thing, that is actually helping society. So Rahu and Ketu, in my opinion, can go any of these ways. But Vic Dicara, and he's the authority here, not me, he is saying that Rahu and Ketu and Saturn, being authoritarian, can indicate pronounced clashes with conservative and hierarchical powers. So Vic is saying that those are really not ideal for Magha. Saturn especially I could see, because Saturn is anti-authoritarian. It's the common man. It's natural. It goes outside of norms in order to do what feels essentially good. It feels securing for myself. So, someone with Saturn in Magha can really, again, they can attach themselves to an ideology that fits their personal moral compass, however limited that moral compass is. They'll find the authority in it, because you can find authority anywhere. You can find, a cocaine addict can say, do you know how many people do cocaine? And they can tell everybody in their lives that this is as legitimate as anything else. You guys are suppressing me because you're all stuffy, because you're idiots, whereas I should be free to have the authority invested in me to be someone who advocates for doing something bad, like doing cocaine or being lascivious about anything. Saturn will fight all oppressing influences just for the sake of it. And as we've said in this whole video, Magha sometimes is holding down the instinct of humanity to deviate from what is good. When Saturn is in Magha, Saturn is going to fight against that. Fight against any discipline that comes from a positive lineage of moral compass. Saturn is going to naturally fight against that. So this gives Saturn more difficulty in stabilizing itself, because ultimately what the Vedas are all about in a lot of ways is aligning our heart with our word. And if we can't use positive words, a word is a positive expression. If we can't align with our word and what we consider as a collective to be the positive good things that we're moving towards, then nobody's ever going to have a full sense of stability. Saturn will have a difficult time aligning itself with its stability if it always is mistrusting the iron bar of the collective ordinance, or even your personal ordinance. If Saturn is fighting against the idea that there is a road of the good, a path of good that does not deviate, if Saturn always has to fight against that, then it's going to be hard for it to keep its word. It's going to be hard for it to be stable. So Saturn has a hard time here. I can definitely see why Vic is saying that. Rahu, Ketu, and Saturn can all bring this out. But again, just as having a good planet in Magha, having Sun, Mars, and Jupiter being in Magha, it's a good thing, but you got to consider the whole chart. Nobody is, finalized. It's not necessarily final that a person having Sun, Mars, and Jupiter in Magha is going to be a good thing. And it's the same way, it's not necessarily final or hopeless if a person has Rahu or Ketu or Saturn in Magha. You're not hopeless, but it's good to use astrology to recognize a pattern that might not be serving you. That's why we're here. Very good. Gotta love Vic Dicara, folks. He really knows how to bring it all down. Now, Vic Dicara always gives us a life lesson that resonates with a life lesson that, sorry, my neighbors have a dog in the house. Vic Dicara gives us a life lesson to help us to understand how the nakshatra, in this case Magha, can be used for all of us outside of astrology. There are always lessons in all of the nakshatras, and we could see it, but let's let Vic define it. The word apabhramsa, it's the suppressing ruination. That's what Magha is doing. It's suppressing ruination. The word apabhramsa teaches us that the ideal objective of any conservative power is to prevent a valuable, useful, and excellent and helpful thing from being destroyed or lost. Very clear. It is a misuse of conservative power to conserve and protect things that are corrupt or that no longer serve their intended purpose well. That's Magha gone bad. The word rudanta, also, how it's written is rudanta, so I'm going to say that. The word rudanta also gives us a clear picture of the primary weapon used by conservative powers, which is condemnation, condemning that which is bad. To criticize, to deplore, and to condemn deviation from a valuable principle or custom. This is the natural tendency of conservatives, for by doing so, they dissuade the majority of the population from openly engaging in such deviance, and thus they significantly curtail its spread. You can see how this can be useful in times and how it can also be detrimental. The sutra also teaches us how to win without openly fighting, and this is by demoralizing opponents, by displaying the authority invested in us by superior powers. So, in a world where ideally police are a good thing, it's not always the case, but it's an idea. In a world where police are a good thing, I can walk around, and there are times, police are a good thing even in our world. It's just that everything has got to be taken with a grain of salt in the context of the time and history. But even in our time, I can walk with my bag full of groceries from the grocery store over to my house, and I don't necessarily need to fight. I don't need to fear that I'm necessarily going to get mugged, because I can tell somebody, I'm going to call the cops. I mean, they could just snag my bag and then run away. But if someone threatens to kill me, I can say, hey, I'm going to call the cops because you threatened me. Or, there is some kind of power that I can call upon instead of having necessarily to fight every person I see out on the road. There is a superior power and authority that is helping to keep things together, ideally. So this sutra teaches us to win without openly fighting, by demoralizing opponents, by displaying the authority invested in us by superior powers. Cleans up a lot of unnecessary crap when you are a part of this authority structure in a positive way. One sibling defeats the other by siding with the parents, is an example. Police deter the majority of criminals simply by wearing a badge. Kings prevent revolt by claiming to be authorized by a legendary god or hero. Again, for better or worse. Even priests, philosophers, and spiritualists win arguments by showing allegiance to more widely respected scientists, philosophers, sages, or scriptures, such as I'm doing with Vic Dicara. If one is confident in the power invested by a higher authority, there's little need to fight. The confidence itself deters others from contesting. And this is part of the power that can come through a Magha person. It's pretty cool. So this is the supplication that we read from Magha. The supplication is like an obeisance. It's like an oblation. It's like a prayer that Vic gives, has written for the deity as per the energy that the nakshatra gives. And Vic says, "The Pitri come with Magha. They cause the mind's desires to be good like their own. If we invite them, they will come and strengthen our endeavors by self-discipline. Fire burns but does not burn them." Vic gives us a footnote and says, "This means that they are authorized to punish and regulate others, but no one is authorized to punish and regulate them." That's the Pitris. "For they exist in another realm beyond our scrutiny." It's the law of karma is what's being conveyed here. The nakshatra of these Pitris, Magha, helps us to perform our deeds justly, for the right purpose, so nobody gets too power hungry and goes crazy with any amount of power that they have. Nobody can go and completely terrorize and be tyrannical if there are vested karmic laws being conveyed through the Pitris. So that was our supplication, coming from the Nakshatra, the Heart of Vedic Astrology by Vic Dicara. Beautiful. I hope you guys enjoyed that. It's always interesting to go through these things and to see how things are conveyed. I love sharing from this particular set of books that I got going on. Now, everybody, we have one last reading to go. We've been talking about Magha from the Taittiriya Brahmana. Now, this next section is coming from the divine forces of the lunar nakshatras as portrayed in the Vedas by the author named Radhe. This author, as I often talk about in this part of the video, this author is a sidereal astrologer. So she has the idea that the sidereal, the nakshatras and the signs are combined. And so there's often times where we have to take with a grain of salt what an author says about a nakshatra. For example, Magha in the sidereal astrologers is considered to be only in Leo. So oftentimes people will correlate Magha with Leo-like qualities, always inherently. But as we know, it's possible, we don't know for sure, but it's possible that there are parts of Magha that fall into Virgo. I'd say that's pretty well the case. The first bit of Virgo likely falls into Magha as well. So this is why we have to kind of be careful when we're reading this author's take on the Magha native. We have to make sure that we're being mindful and watchful of cues where their artistic license might pull in an idea of the Magha native as being strictly Leo-like, or even to have the qualities of its nakshatra, Vimshotri Lord, which is known to be Ketu. So these distortions can happen for this author, but this author is still very sharp, well-researched, and usually most of their stuff comes from a positive assertion of her knowledge of the nakshatras. You can check out my other videos where I describe the deities of the nakshatras. It comes from this author. So she's very well researched in all things Vedic. We just have to, in today's day and age, as explorers of the ancient mythos of the nakshatras in a modern context with tropical astrology, we have to be mindful of where we get our information. Doesn't mean it's useless information. We just have to pick through the seeds. Got to pick out the stems, you know? So let's dig into it. This is the Magha native. Magha is deeply connected with the ancient ancestry of man. It's a divine lineage originating with the rishis, who are offsprings of the gods, as well as Manu Vaivashvata and his imperial sons. As we've just learned, if you watch the video talking about the deity of Magha, which is the Pitris that I've created, we learned that there's two different pathways to self-realization of the lineage of the Pitris. There's the what did we call it? It was the Pitriana, which relates to the moon path of ancestry coming from a common biological DNA man. That's the Pitriana, the path of the moon. And then there's the Devayana, who follows the path of the sun, of the tropical astrology, of the soul, of the individuated soul consciousness of the Atman that comes from something that's beyond the biological body. So, consistent with this exalted lineage, Magha translates as the mighty one or the great one. The star of Magha, now this is a bit of astronomy, again coming from a sidereal practitioner. The star of Magha resides in the majestic mane of the lion, the Leo constellation. And its Yogatara star is Regulus, which the Western people have defined as Alpha Leonis. And it's a star referred to as the Little King due to its magnificent luminosity. So, again, this is somebody who believes the constellation of Leo is a fixed, set thing. So that's the caveat that I'm going to give there. But it is true that Regulus is the star that is referred to when we talk about Magha, the nakshatra. Thank you for Gnan. Thanks for enjoying the video here today. So, the Magha native often exudes an air of royalty or preeminence. The Magha native has likely dedicated time to tracing his family lineage and his family heritage, which would include several notable ancestors. Fields involved in genealogy and or genetics attract the attention of the Magha native, and this may evolve into a full-time career for them. Remember, this is usually when this book describes a native, they're usually referring to the person who has the moon in Magha as well as the ascendant in Magha. So examples of careers that might be good for a Magha native include forensics, medical genetics, wildlife biology, clinical geneticists, a genetic counselor, and so on. Likewise, books on the life and traditions of ancient times find a place on this native's bookshelf. A little bit of anthropological interest is involved in there. Now we learn that L. Ron Hubbard had the moon in Magha. He is the founder of the Church of Scientology. Hubbard held some unusual views regarding ancient life here on Earth. Wow, this totally makes sense. When I think of Hubbard, remember, Magha can be kind of, severe or rough and fierce in the way that they convey their stuff. It's interesting that Hubbard had a lot of backlash for his very interesting ways of understanding human lineage. According to Hubbard, somebody called Xenu, the dictator of the Galactic Confederacy, brought billions of people to Earth 75 million years ago. These people were all killed by hydrogen bombs. This theory was incorporated into Scientology, which postures that the immortal spirits of these aliens adhere to humans, causing spiritual harm. Wild. Now, back onto the Magha native. The Magha native holds great respect for their elders. Perhaps the Magha native is particularly close to a grandparent or a great aunt or uncle. For those family members who are deceased, the native senses their watchful presence and at times even seeks their advice and guidance. The native is peculiarly adept at communicating with helpers from the other side, both family members and others. Getting into the supernatural and channeling and mediumship and this kind of stuff. Now, a professional field that requires such adeptness has great appeal to the native. Examples include shamanism, as well as mediumship. The proficiency of connecting with souls on the other side is not dissimilar to the ability to communicate with animals and or nature in general. In fact, telepathy and clairvoyance are also related to this aptitude. This is all very Magha stuff. Now, the sacrificial wish of Magha's ruling devatas is to prosper among their ancestors. That is a phrase that comes from the latter part of the Taittiriya Brahmana. This wish to prosper amongst their ancestors may manifest in one or more ways in the life of the Magha native. Firstly, the native has a strong desire to carry forward the notable accomplishments of their lineage. Secondly, the Magha native is likely to prosper from his relatives and or extended family members. Perhaps he's afforded a privileged position in the family business or bestowed a handsome inheritance. Note that one translation of Magha is wealth. Remember, it's gifts, it's rewards, it's something coming from the patrilineal focus or goal or objective of a whole family. If a person aligns themselves with that, they're going to be served as a vehicle and vessel for the interests of the ongoing family lineage. Where else is the family lineage going to channel its resources but through the person who's receptive to it? So this is why these people can get these things, these privileges, if they're open to it, if they're conscious of it, and naturally they probably would be if they have the moon or the ascendant or any prominence of planets in Magha. Lastly, a strong paternal sense draws the native's attention to those opportunities that require wisdom and maturity. The Magha native may be considered an elder within their community, or become the leader of a state or a nation. The native assumes this same position within their extended family, where their advice and leadership are often sought. Margaret Thatcher is somebody who had the moon in Magha. She exemplifies this aspect of Magha. Thatcher was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1979 to 1990, and prior to this, she was the leader of the Conservative Party for nearly 15 years. Now, should Magha be grossly afflicted, this can indicate a need for the native to work through some problematic DNA passed down from their ancestors, or as a result of their own past lives. Through their purification, however that goes, the native releases future generations from inherited or genetically encoded vasanas, which are patterns that are potentially destructive or counterproductive. Stopping the generational trauma. That's a very Magha thing. And sometimes, it's almost like a person who has to experience a disease or some kind of genetic DNA mutation or malfunction, and they are sick for a long time, but eventually they get over it. It's like when the plague came through in medieval England in the 1600s, it wiped out about 90% of the population. 10% of the population for some reason survived and was allowed to continue on, and they got used to the virus, the plague. Their bodies succumbed to it, even though they were probably sick for a long time before they could get it. So they took on this illness in order to purify it. In the same way, a Magha person with gross afflictions in the nakshatra of Magha might find themselves with counterproductive and potentially destructive vasanas. It's genetically encoded characteristics that they have to purify somehow. Susie Underwood is correct when she says a Magha native might be the one in the family to help heal familial curses or traumas. That's correct, Susie. And unfortunately, usually, the only way out of it is through it for the Magha native. It's very possible that afflictions in Magha can show things that continue on that don't get healed, that the person is just afflicted with them and can't move through them. But if the whole chart is conducive to evolution, it's possible that Magha Nakshatra natives will find themselves entangled in a family that's full of trauma and curses that need healing, and they end up being the person for whom a huge part of their energy, positively speaking, is getting over these curses and traumas, helping the family get through it. It's a beautiful soldier consciousness that can be occurring there if that's the case. Now, finally, let's recall in the Rig Veda that Surya's grand wedding procession commences in Magha. The bridal procession of the sun's daughter, Surya, which the divine mother creator Aditi dispatches, moves along. The oxen of their chariot are whipped along in the Magha constellation. She's taken to her husband's house in the Falguna constellations. And that comes from the Rig Veda. So thus, as with the Falgunis, Magha gives a special affiliation with grand and grandiose celebrations, celebrating the greatness that is, reflective of, a lot of these nakshatras have a chronological narrative. The chronology of the marriage being pushed along in Magha leads to the marriage that happens in the Purva and Uttara Falgunis. It's not always obvious, and this book doesn't always convey the chronology, but in this case, it's a useful thing to see how Magha is leading to the Falgunis. And so Magha is conducive to marriages and to large events and celebrations in this way, shooing them forward. Wonderful. What an amazing reading. I hope you guys enjoyed that. My name is Dustin Cormier. This has been another episode of How to Rock Astrology. This has been us learning about Magha and the Pitris and what they all mean together. So I hope you guys are enjoying this series. I hope you're getting some good, juicy information out of it. I hope you enjoyed learning about the Magha native. Stay tuned. I got more stuff coming out. I got a book that's going to be released eventually. Keep your eyes out for it. It's called Eternal Soul Afternoon. And I'm going to have more videos coming out. We got lots of nakshatra stuff still to be talked about, and lots of stuff on the Lagna, the Rising Signs series that I'm still moving through as well. I hope to see you then. Thank you everybody for watching. Thank you to my friend Susie Underwood for always hanging out with me. And for everybody who watches my videos. I appreciate you all very much. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Enjoy the rest of your week. I'll see you the next time I see you, y'all. Om Tat Sat. Thanks, Susie. And thanks, everybody.